Welcome, system thinkers. You're watching The Question. I'm your host, Ben Callahan, and each week I invite a new co-host to join us and help facilitate a deep dive into design systems. This episode of The Question is sponsored by Zeroheight and Sparkbox, and we're so glad you're here. Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to join me for this episode's deep dive. My name is Ben Callahan. I'm a design system researcher, writer, speaker, coach, and consultant. But most of all, I'm a curious guy. And that's precisely what led me to create The Question. Every week, a new co-host and I will ask you a few questions about a very specific design system-related topic. You'll have 48 hours to answer, and everyone who does is invited to join the deep dive. Each week is kind of like a mini research project on a very niche design system topic. This only works if we all stay in learning mode. Before I introduce my co-host for this week, I just want to say a big thank you to Zeroheight and Sparkbox for sponsoring this episode. Zeroheight is the end-to-end design system management platform, the place your team can document, deliver, measure, and evolve your design system. Book a demo or learn more at zeroheight.com. Sparkbox partners with complex organizations to create user-driven digital experiences, including world-class design systems. Learn more at sparkbox.com/thequestion. This week, I'm joined by my co-host and friend, Noelle Lansford, to talk about tracking design system adoption. Noelle is currently the design lead for design systems at Alaska Airlines, and I'm so excited to have her joining us this week. Let's jump in. So let's dive in. The question that we asked was on design system adoption. And, I think one of the things that I keep hearing from folks is that it's really hard to measure this in a really accurate way. And so we wanted to kind of dig into that a little bit and understand how folks are doing that, what's working and what's not. So we kind of started with this quantitative question. Are you confidently tracking the adoption of your design system? And a lot of you tried to hedge your bets on the word confidently, but we put it there for a reason. So that I think was one question, and we got some numbers back on that, right? So it was neck and neck, yes and no, for a long time, and then at the end, a bunch of no's came in. So we ended up with about half of people saying they are not confident in the way that they track, or they're just not even trying. So that was kind of an interesting number to see. And then as a follow-on to that, we said, if you said yes, tell us how you do so and how it's going. If you said no, tell us why and share a bit about what you've tried. So that's kind of the context for today. And we had 224 folks that we emailed this question to. We also shared it on LinkedIn and Twitter or X and all those other places. And we got 55 responses this week. And you can click this link here to go see the actual raw data if you want to take a peek at the actual responses. Okay, I've been talking for like 10 minutes and that's too long. Noelle, what was your sort of high level understanding when you kind of looked through the data?
Yeah, there was like some that stood out to me right away. And I love that you included confidently in there because I feel like I relate to what's already in the chat of like a yes, but option would have been nice because it like puts us all at ease. But I like that you put confidently in there because I think that's the heart of the question to me. Like, can we actually feel like we're confident presenting our numbers or whatever it is that we're tracking to the people that need to see it? So if we're having some uncertainty around there, I'm really curious to dig into why we have uncertainty about it. And I think I might have put it over in the kind of notes and questions area of like the shared sentiment of, it's good consumers are using the system, but are they using it correctly? And how do you track that? And can you track that? Is that what your stakeholders need to hear? I have a lot. I probably have more questions than I do answers about this. So I'd love to kind of maybe start it off there of, what are people trying to get out of their numbers and why or why not is that affecting the confidence level of what we get?
Yeah. That's a great question. And there was somebody said this nicely. I think this is maybe what you're responding to, when you call out that sentiment. I'll have to look for it, but there were some really good idea that sort of like, differentiating between the idea of adoption and actual proper usage right here.
Yeah.
I've yet to see any solution that comes remotely close to in-context measurement of proper usage, right? So that's a sticky little area there to dig into.
Yeah, and even to follow up on that, I think there's a quote, maybe two more down. I start it, and it says like, the thing that keeps me up at night is I still don't think I could provide concrete evidence to the person with the money that it's still worth the investment. And so that's, on the extreme end of it too, of like, ooh, where does this lead to, right? So there's kind of that, maybe that affects confidence levels, as some pressure too. That could be part of it.
And I didn't state this at the beginning, but this column of responses were from folks who said no to the first question, and this column is from folks who said yes. And then there's a few statements over here that were sort of folks who couldn't commit to either. Anyone have thoughts on this sentiment? Go ahead, Tony, and jump in.
Yeah, I'm just curious because so many people called out the word proper usage, and we've been having discussions in my current role around, well, I mean, when we talk about adoption, are we really talking about just the efficiency of leveraging components within a code base and using the design system as a way to improve our front end? And then there's this UX side where it is, you caveat with, there is a proper way to use it. So what we're trying to do is build a design system that is, by its very nature, more flexible than we probably are comfortable with it being as designers, and especially on the UX side. But when we measure adoption, like, I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts or experiences. Is there a different way you measure adoption about proper usage of components versus just straight adoption of the coded components that are in a system?
That's the question. Elise, continuation there?
Yeah. So, I mean, adoption and proper usage mean a lot of different things. So, Tony Ann, I don't know if this is exactly what you were looking for, but one of the things that we did at Indeed was we actually looked at, caveat, this is a handful of years back, so a little bit before some of the more modern tooling that we may be using now, but we were looking at usage, so total usage per component, but then we were also looking at what we were calling overrides. And so this was, we weren't like, now if you're using something like Material UI, you can just like use the SX prop and you have this sort of like safe, like correct way to override things. This was before that. So we were really looking at like, they've literally added like a CSS class, like they've added JavaScript on top. They've broken the connection in a way that makes it really, really hard to get, like an upgrade later from the system. And so even with something like Material UI and like the SX prop, you can also track the ways that people are using things. So if you have a component and, people are adding onto it all of the time, like that's a little bit of a signal that maybe they're not using it, or it's not serving its purpose for that consumer. And that's a little bit different than, say, something like, Material UI box, where like, it's like box or grid, or like something where they're all, they're making layout or something, but just like within a component. And so we at Indeed, we were using our own, like we had our own internal like SQL. And so like we had a bunch of this like hand rolled stuff, but I've been playing around with Omelet, and you can get a lot of this data where you can see like which props are being used on a component, and like is SX being used, and if so, where, and like what places, and what kind of usage. So obviously that's only one element of proper usage that doesn't really even cover like branding or what have you, but that was something that we did, and it was a really big metric for us, because it was a way to measure one of the biggest problems that we had, because people wouldn't upgrade to the new version of the package because they had these overrides. And so that was a signal and like a way for us to talk about it. Like we really need to fix this, or like this is actually the measure of a team's healthy adoption, rather than like, oh, we're using the components, but we're like overriding them all of the time, and then we can't do anything with it. So
Elise mentioned Omelet, which is a tool many of you are probably familiar with. It's funny, when I first posted this and the topic of adoption on LinkedIn, I got comments from two tool folks. One was from Omelet, and one was from this new one, System Up, which is something I just saw a demo of but haven't really dug into. So if those are of interest to you, you think you can get to those. And then Luro is another sort of design system integration tool that does some interesting tracking, of component usage and stuff.
Luro is awesome. It didn't work for us because you do have to have non-garbage class names. So if you're using React and generating garbage class names, Luro hasn't really figured out how to connect everything very well yet.
Gotcha.
I know they're working on that. But Omelette, I've just been using it for like a couple of weeks and getting a ton of value. So if anybody wants to see a demo or anything, like happy to show kind of like what that looks like set up because it's amazing.
Awesome. Jane, jump in.
Yeah. So I lead a team on Firefox, and so we have a 20-year-old code base. So any code changes are really hard to do, and we're really early in our journey on code. And so our tracking, we have gotten a lot of engineering feedback that the thing to track really is like lines of code saved. We've been doing a lot of work there, but kind of on this topic of like being able to track like sentiment or really getting a look at like proper usage, what we've started to do is we've started to move left in the process because we realized like by tracking the amount of times we can help people early in designing, like we're saving the engineers from building something new. And that's already like helping us. So like if we can answer 60 questions in office hours about like four of the same components, like that is 20 times we've reused the same component and made sure engineering is using the same component versus like being able to track like how it's being used necessarily in code. And that like captures a lot of the design and engineering sentiment that we need.
I love that you bring that up, Jane, because one of the things that I've also been thinking about a lot is how our relationship with product teams can tie into the way that we think about tracking things. Because part of that sentiment that is complicated, right, is how do you make those numbers meaningful? And I love what you said there because you actually get to see like we're saving designers time and, they don't have to rethink about these ideas. And that's something that our team is working with too, right? Like with our AI products, oftentimes they're moving so fast that maybe we don't have even the time to code them components before they need them. But can we save our designers time up front by giving them something that's reusable? Yeah, let's see if we can do that. And so like having that flexible mentality based on the relationships with product can be a great fit for a lot of teams.
Yeah. And like the true win I've seen is we've had a product manager come to us and say, hey, we're reusing the same component in different messaging parts of our app. Can you guys help us create a new component? And I'm like, that's the win. Like
that is the win. Yeah. Having your consumers come to you to say, hey, we're thinking about it in this way because we have this relationship with you, and trusting both parties to do what they've set out to do. That's fantastic. Yeah, that's like the win of adoption, right?
Love that. Yeah. Bo, what's up?
Hey, I'm Bo. I'm currently with US Bank, and kind of along with that, I think, I'm kind of skimming through all the responses here, and it's really clear that it can change a lot depending on what you count as really valuable in terms of adoption. So it could be like what we just talked about, like someone contributing. I see someone called out like office hours, attendance, code adoption, Slack channel support requests. So it seems like if I had to categorize it, it would be like community vibrancy or really tactical, like pickup and use of what the team is publishing. And one thing, I don't know if anyone else out there struggles with this, but being part of like a larger organization, the tactical side of things can be really tough to get a really good view of because there are so many different teams and so many different products, and there's new products being developed and there's legacy products that don't even have a team anymore. And so it becomes really important like to target which parts of everything digital we want to measure and set up as like a success metric for our team to, demonstrate adoption, and not just like make ourselves look good, but really get a good sense of, the really crucial work that's going on. How are we supporting that in our organization? So yeah, I love figuring out like, what's most valuable? How can you have the best impact in your organization, whether it's community or tactical, and then figuring out like, what are those most important products to really support within your organization.
Love that. Joanna.
I was just resonating with that. I left a sticky on the board about this, but we've created a framework around like how adopted we think a team can get. Because some teams are using vendor products or legacy applications where there's like no chance of them pulling in our design system code. And then we measure them against, like, if they have a max of a level 3 adoption and we're at a level 0, can we get them to a level 2 or something like that? But not kind of keeping every team trying to hit the same target, because that we're also in a large company. I'm at Liberty Mutual. It's just unrealistic.
Yeah, I love that scale. That stood out to me when we were going through the different teams that are using a scale for it. And that there was a question that I had in my mind based on some other questions or answers that we got back, which was like, we have Figma, and that has its own whole set of metrics you could run. You have code, and sometimes those adoption rates might even be in opposition to each other. So how do you tell a cohesive story to your stakeholders when those two different metrics might really not agree with what, the story you're telling? So I love the scale, and I'd love to hear if others have other ideas on how to tell that cohesive story with all the different tooling that's available to track.
Hey everybody, there's still a lot of great content left in this episode, but let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors.
How much time are you spending wrangling all the aspects of your design system? Trying to create a unified experience with your UI libraries, your code resources, your design tokens? You need a platform that makes managing a design system easier, not a chore. So zeroheight is the design system management platform that centralizes everything, including your documentation. And this year, we've rolled out some game-changing features that make zeroheight even more powerful. First up, we have the adoption tab, which gives you real-time insights into how your design system is actually being used. So you can hook it up directly to your code repos and NPM packages, and it will not only make sure that everyone is using your latest packages, but it'll also give you insights into component usage as well. Finally, you can prove real design system ROI. And then there's our brand new API as well. In a few minutes, you can create your own Figma plugin or API chatbot to bring your documentation to the places that your team is actually searching for it. If you're looking to make design system management seamless and efficient, what are you waiting for? Try zeroheight for free today by heading to zeroheight.com and use the offer code QUESTION to get a free 90-day trial. That's zeroheight.com, and the offer code is QUESTION. Enjoy the show.
For the last 16 years, Ben and I have both been business partners and friends in our company Sparkbox, which is always aimed to build a better web. In the beginning, that was two software engineers coming together believing there was a better way to do things. What Sparkbox evolved into is a complete team that includes user experience, design, engineering, and plenty of consulting and strategy. About 10 years ago, we dove headfirst into design systems, helping some of the world's largest companies and universities and even tons of small businesses to help realize the efficiency and promise of what design systems can bring. I continue to be in awe of what Ben learns and shares in this community. If you need strategic or tactical help with your design system, swing by sparkbox.com and reach out. We'd love to partner with you and your team. Have a great day. Enjoy the show.
I think these scales are actually the only way to really think holistically about adoption, because it's definitely not binary, right? It's not like we use it or we don't. So we have to sort of get at the nuance. We have to break it apart, And the thing I love about these is it gives you the opportunity to express what adoption means for a variety of disciplines. Instead of us only thinking about using Figma or writing code, there are so many other things. Those are very asset-based usages, and that's important, right? That we got to measure that. But we also have processes we have to define. We have great documentation that we want folks to use. There's There's assets available for QA teams and for UX folks, prototyping, right? So there's a really wide variety of ways the system can be adopted. And I'm interested in trying to measure all of that, because if we only measure the code and the design, we're just leaving a lot of opportunity for the benefit of adoption on the table, you know? Jeff, continuation here?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that, I think while we're focusing on adoption, I think adoption is part of measuring the success of design systems, and measuring success is a very large topic. It's something that Nathan Curtis at Clarity 21 covered in an entire section of his workshop. He categorized it into like 6 different buckets. So things like productivity, coverage, and satisfaction, which are more quantitative, and then consistency, quality, and efficiency, which are more like qualitative. And then there's a whole slew of like questions and things that kind of fall under each of those. I might be able to take a screenshot and share it of that kind of like summary slide. But I think it really falls into, and it depends on the organization, but there's really 2 questions. It's like, how comfortable is your org with extending system components? And that will differ greatly across organization. And then what language does leadership speak? And how can you communicate adoption in their language? I actually did some work at Bill to track adoption of components and translate it into a monetary value, because that's the language that the company spoke. That's the language that leaders spoke. And so if we were able to quantify that and say the design system team minimally has saved the company X amount, that's something that leadership understands. I have an article on that as well. I'll share in the Figma.
Yeah, I just kind of following on from that too, and just talking about the idea of adoption as a metric that the business understands. I've seen a couple articles talking about this. I'll have to go back and dig them up, but this idea that adoption became this design system metric that we could talk about was like, we made a bunch of components and thus it's good, therefore you should adopt them. Hey, look, people adopted them. Hey, success for our team means more components and more people adopting them, so let's make some more components. And it becomes this sort of like circular, navel-gazy way of being like, this is the value of the design system. It has components and people use them. And I think it's really interesting in all the conversations we're having today and in the design system community in general that we're maturing a little bit and trying to understand beyond just like, oh, our team's using this stuff and like, how are they using it? And trying to think about ways that are a little bit more robust than simply like a number that you kind of point to and be like, look, it's this very clear, like, yes, it's good, people are using it, like, here we have this number. And then, I'm really suspect too of all the, not to diss on Jeff, you were just talking, this is not personal, but like we can point to a dollar value around usage. This is just such a nebulous space, and it's like so hard to connect that, like, oh, it saved everybody a certain amount of time, but even that, like connecting that back to a dollar value, I find really kind of sus. And so I'm trying to find some other ways to measure, like, not dollar value, but like confusion or seamlessness, or what are the like behaviors that we want our teams to be doing, behaviors beyond I used it, but behaviors like, how many cycles does design an inch have in a handoff? Or, how are the engineers finding the things that they need? So for us, one of the problems that we have is our storybook is a hot mess. And so everybody's just like, we did a survey and everybody's just like, yeah, I just kind of search through the code base to like see what other people are doing. And then I maybe use that, or maybe I go look at storybook. And so like, if I can start to measure those things, like even a measure like every component has a working story means the behavior, like it's the behavior that we want to track after. So sorry, I'm starting to ramble, but just trying to think about like, what are some deeper metrics that actually get at behaviors?
Yeah. Neve, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so a couple of extensions going back to Jeff as well, and to Elise as well. So that scale that had the 5 levels on it. So that is something that I worked with our design system team to create, because the language of our business is quite binary. It's like either they're using it or they're not. And please tell me how much money we're saving with this. And I've spoken to Ben about this before. Like, we've been asked to try and measure this stuff, and we've gone down so many rabbit holes trying to get some, hard data on this, because I think when some of our leaders may have Googled this stuff in the past, they get things like, X company saved 534 engineering hours on implementing their design system. And they're like, okay, Neve, can you help us find this type of a metric? Because when it comes to defending the capacity that our team spends working on the design system, we kind of need that kind of stuff, because it seems to be a constant battle to ensure that we keep our developers and our designers on the design system strictly, and not on other front-end initiatives that we have in my company. So that's why we kind of went back to that kind of those levels, right? Because it was to kind of give that holistic view. I'm still working on trying to convince, our stakeholders that this is a good way of doing things, and they're coming on board with it a little bit more. I still think they would like more hard data. So Jeff, some of the things that you mentioned, I'd love to hear about what you did, because please give it to me. It will really, really help. And there was one more train of thought that I had, actually, and now it's gone. Something, at least, that you said. It might come back to me in a minute, sorry, and if it does, I'll put up my hand again, but I've lost it. But yeah, so I'm glad that other people think that that's helpful. But as I said, it's not the end all and the be all by any means. And also it has a lot of limitations on it, because you can't automate this stuff. It's all qualitative stuff. And that's a huge time drag in trying to get around to talk to all these people to get that information and collate it. And that's also a blocker in some cases. So yeah, but I'm glad other people think it's helpful. At least it's giving us the structure, at least, doing the best that we can, with what we can. But yeah, I'd love to hear a bit more of the Jeff, or what you've done too, because if we could kind of get some of a hybrid approach, it would be hopefully satisfactory for the powers that be.
Bo, do you have a continuation there?
Yeah, so I think, well, I love the scale of adoption. I think that's really helpful, like, to understand where your audience is at and like different teams are at, and just trying to help them get to the next level. I think like design systems are a lot more than components. Like we mentioned with Storybook, like if your components are fantastic, but your storybook or your doc site or other parts of the experience are a mess, it's going to be really hard to use those awesome components. So thinking through like the user journey of finding the information, using it, testing it, shipping the product, throughout that whole journey, like where are the tools the team is making being most effective? So I think it gets into like design ops world, but it's more about like understanding where people are at and just trying to create tools that help at the right time. So my brain's going about this like concept of levels, and then also how does that span across like a team's life cycle as they're creating a product and shipping it.
Yeah, that's excellent. The levels are great too, because they almost provide a roadmap for other groups that aren't adopting yet to sort of see what does it look like for us to come on board, Guy, do you have a continuation there?
I do, not only a continuation, but I'm going to combine what Elise and Jeff said earlier. And I think it makes sense, at least for my experience, it makes sense to have a number or something that we measure externally or publicly outside of the design system team, and numbers that we use internally for the design system team. So for example, we measure internally our customer satisfaction, how designers and engineers work with the design system. And we measure how they're using it well, how they're not using it well, and what sort of things they're running into. Externally, we measure coverage within codes that are going out. And the assumption is that, and I wrote that big paragraph on the yes column of the measuring the percentage, where our assumption is that if if they use more of our system, that means we've done a good job all the way until then. It was easy to work with. It was easy to find information. Product managers like it, so they want to use more of it. It becomes a no-brainer to use it. So that is kind of like an indication that the outcome is the result of all the great work we've been doing so far. But I think that is kind of like the number we put outside the door that says, look, 70% of everything that's going out has our design system in it. But then internally, in order to see why we're not hitting that number, we do those other measures to see how we can improve the process on the way to get there.
I was going to say, this is reminding me of a clarity talk that was given this past year by Erica Hall, where she's talking about design being at the business table. And I love the way that she phrased that, because it's talking about, we have our own things that we're worried about, but when we come to the business table, what are we bringing and how are we bringing it? And I also love what was mentioned about talking about design systems, thinking about it as a user journey, right? Because our consumers are our end user. So like thinking through that as a product, thinking through our work as a product and how we would measure that. Maybe it isn't as different as we think as measuring, like a end market product. What do stakeholders want from that? Maybe we can learn a little bit from product on how they're presenting their numbers to stakeholders as well.
I think it's worth calling out too that in Erica's talk, one of the things that she also said was all of these schmancy statistics that the business people use, like we think of that as like the correct right way to do, how do we talk to the business? And she was like, it's storytelling. Mm-hmm. They are telling a story. And if you can go talk to your business and tell a story, that is more impactful than being able to like have an exact number, because all the statistics are just stories. And people get these statistics, they get these product usage metrics, these financial numbers, they're just numbers until you can put a story around them. And so especially the big thing that I took away from her talk was, especially on the design side, where it's like, what's the value of this? Like, we have to be able to point to a dollar sign. It's like, no, you have to be able to tell a story about what's actually the end result, or does it make people happy, or like, what does it do for our business? And so I think somebody in the Fig Jam said something about like, how do you tell a story about metrics, like across Figma, across, code as well. Like, it's not actually as sciencey and like exact around these numbers. Like, even in engineering things that you're tracking, like look up all of the hot drama about tracking like developer efficiency. Like, we don't know how to track any of that. Like, it's just made up stuff. And I think in most parts of the business, that's true as well. And so, yeah, like doing PR, like, what's the story? How is this going to work for us? Here's some things that we can kind of look at to like tell us and like back that up. But like, convincing your business stakeholders isn't about having the perfect number, because that doesn't exist, and it doesn't exist in any other part of the business either.
Yeah.
In rant.
Elise is getting pumped up.
I've been doing this for the last 2 weeks because we've been trying to do like OKRs, and I'm just like, here's some numbers.
Yeah.
It's fine.
One thing I want to say too, just in response to Guy's statement here, is I think I might disagree a little bit with the idea that seeing coverage in code means things before that have used the system. I've worked with some teams where the engineering group is really sharp, and they're smart enough to look at a variety of design and experience artifacts that they're given, and then sort through the stuff they have available to them in a repository and make it work with the system. I've also worked with teams where the opposite happens, right? It's like, and somebody hinted at this where they said, adoption doesn't mean that of our system doesn't mean that the output in product looks like the system, right? It has to actually be using it. And I actually disagree with that statement too, right? Like, there's a way to, it depends on what's important to you. If cohesion in the interface is the most important thing, and that's more important than code reuse or efficiency in the process, then that's completely okay, right? And that's getting back to old ways of working that are like more like just here's a visual style guide for you, adhere to this, however you do so. So I think I'm less dogmatic about what we mean in these things, as long as what's important to the org is being measured and proven in the system work. if you want to respond, Guy, you can. Christy, then we'll have you jump in.
Yeah, so I'm going to fight you, Ben. No, I'm kidding. It the usual caveat, everything I'm saying is relevant to my current organization and my current situation. For us, my main task is building a design system that is going to be applied to 150 products that were built between the last 5 and 25 years by different companies using different technologies. So unifying all that into them pulling from the same code base and seeing our design system as sort of the path of least resistance and the quickest way to get to the result they need. In our situation, that is the ultimate success story. I 100% agree that it may, like, again, your mileage may vary.
Yeah, perfect. Christy, jump in.
I guess I was just like listening to this conversation about success metrics and what does success look like, which is something I'm used to kind of defining before implementing anything new, especially with internal stakeholders, just making sure that we have a solid understanding of what success looks like before I go and make changes in the product. So I guess I was kind of like wondering what exactly is that for design systems teams? And then for me, are we telling the story to leadership, and is leadership like the owner of the company, or is it your VP of design, or is it your VP of engineering? Because my story changes depending on who I'm talking to. So like in my last company, the way I kind of got buy-in from our founder was I showed him screenshots of all of our competitors and how easy it was from, dropping into our site to checking out versus our site, which had like 20 screens you had to go through because there was no design system. But I didn't actually talk to him about the design system. I just told him I was going to reduce that journey and simplify it. Because founders, in my experience, don't really understand design systems, and you start talking about design systems and they're thinking engineering and engineering debt, and that costs them a lot of money. So I just kind of like, the way I went about that story was I didn't even talk about the design system. I was just like, yeah, we're going to make this super easy, clean, simple. Your customers are going to love it. We'll test it with the customers, and then just showing him how customers responded to the new screens. But talking to engineering, that you got to get technical, like, why should you adopt this design system? Why should you implement your code base? I mean, I felt like I was lucky enough that my engineering team wanted a design system. Like, they were like hungry for it. So it was like the easiest sell in the whole world. But yeah, I don't know. I guess my question is like, what story are we telling? Who are we telling it to? Because sometimes you don't want to go into all the details depending on who you're talking to.
I mean, I'm seeing in the chat, Elise is agreeing with the idea that it's a different story to different groups. And that's definitely something, in a lot of the coaching work I'm doing, we're literally sketching out models to see like, what do different stakeholders care about, right? And it's like, who has influence, who disagrees with the approach, right? Those are the folks, somebody who's got a lot of influence in the organization who doesn't see systems as a good approach. That's the person that can destroy the effort. And if you can convince that person, that's a huge win for you, So that's sort of, we try to map those things out and identify the individuals we should focus in on. And then we tell a story to each one, that's it. But I love the idea that your story for this one didn't even include the system, right? That was appropriate in this context. So any other thoughts there?
Yeah, I love that. Just thinking about those relationships, right? Like relationships with product teams to know what they want, and then relationships with your stakeholders to know what they want. And that can be time consuming, but I love that because like even in our own organization at Nationwide, we have a really honest stakeholder that says, all I care about is impact. And then, he goes on to define what he thinks impact is. And sometimes that's numbers, but he's like, if you just give me a number, I don't know what to do with it. Tell me why the number matters. And so I think that's a really great way to think about it, depending on who your stakeholders are how are they thinking about the numbers? Do they even care about the numbers? If the numbers don't have a story attached to it, why would they care about the chart that has the updated numbers and things like that? So yeah, I love the word impact in context of those relationships as well. Yeah, I don't know. It's exciting work.
Continuation or new subject, Elise?
No, just a continuation.
Yep.
I was thinking about this in the chat and Guy was commenting, Noelle, you're talking about impact and, how do you show, like, there's maybe kind of two parts to this, right? There's for people who are trying to like get a design system going or adopted, it's like, what is the sell? How do we say, hey, here's what we think is going to be impacted. Here's the value that we think you're going to get, right? Like, Christy, you were talking about, we're going to reduce all, this like UX confusion, or, the engineers are going to be able to move faster or whatever. And then there's also this other part, which is the part that I'm thinking about right now, which is what's the thing that how do we prove or show that we did the thing? And that's the connective tissue I think that we maybe are all looking for. And this is what it's been on my mind the past couple of weeks is like, the leadership hired me to do this thing. And they're like, we think that a design system increases, visual consistency and like design eng collaboration, come help us do that. And I'm going, here's the work that I think needs to be done, because here's where I'm seeing the problems are. What do I put on a spreadsheet or, OKR deck or whatever to say this number moved, and that is a signal that the behavior you want to see is happening or not happening?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no number that says your engineers are doing everything right. Like, that is an untrackable thing. And so it's like putting those things together. And I think that's a communication skill, not a metrics problem.
Yeah. I think this comes back to adoption, because what we have to do is correlate, right? The idea that like increased usage of the system results in the kinds of things that are important to all the different subscriber groups, and they all care about different things. So you can't, as a systems person, possibly measure their success across all these different groups, different users, different needs, different goals. But what you can do is monitor their reporting on their own success and correlate that to improvements when they are using the system. And if you've done your job in sort of understanding their needs, you will see that. That's kind of, in my mind, why adoption is still really critical for systems folks to measure.
Yeah, real quick, I know we want to get to a new topic too, probably, but I love what you mentioned about follow-up, because that's really where my mind has been at, is where is the follow-up? And like, I've had some opportunities to talk to a lot of companies recently about complaints around follow-up. And so I think as an industry, we're starting to mature in that area. And so thinking about metrics less as this big haul, like either quarterly or annually, and thinking about it, how can I get those pieces as we go to build this follow-up story, so that at any point when somebody comes to me and says, is the design system successful? Is it working? I have impactful statements, sentiments, and hopefully numbers that can point to the story that we're trying to tell with the work that we're doing.
All right, I want to shift us. Robin, take us in a new direction.
I just have a question, like, it just popped up in my mind about, because we talked like about tracking like numbers and like code. And I was wondering, is there a way, and does it even make sense to track the cultural adoption of a design system in a company? So like, is there an argument to say, okay, if you do have a company that adopts a design system that has a high adoption, is there a way to say that they all share some kind of trait in terms of like roles or processes where you can kind of measure their cultural adoption? So that's not just the output, but just like how the design system is lived by the people in the company.
That's sort of what I was trying to get at when I was suggesting it's more than assets, right? It's process as well. And that's how we've kind of helped folks do that is like it's not super quantitative, but it's definitely more on the qualitative side, understanding sort of how folks are feeling about the process of using the system, the process of contributing, the process of how things happen when we deprecate something, all of those kinds of processes that are part of it. Guy, jump in.
Yeah, it is definitely ties to what we talked about earlier. And even the number that I was talking about, the coverage within the code, that is a measurable behavior that to us says there's a change in mindset within the company. I think what you want to do is look at what would be the behaviors that signal to you a cultural change has been made. Is it, for example, let's say you have design system office hours once a week. Is it the number of people who show up? Would that tell you that something changed? Is it the number of tickets that people submit? Is it how many people answer other people? Not from the team itself, like someone submits a question and someone from a different team, another design system team, for example, answers them. Those are all behaviors that some of them are anecdotal, but some of them might be a bit more systematic that you can measure, and that would tell you there's a needle movement on how the company thinks about building things.
That's really great, Guy. I love that insight. Jane, jump in.
Yeah, I think it often also depends on the company. Like one thing I came to learn when I joined Mozilla, because the culture is open source, and everyone wants to contribute to a thing, we were starting from literally a common CSS dumping ground file. And the culture shift we wanted was everyone contributing to a tokens file. And the wins and things we track are literally people following a tokens process and submitting tokens patches for review. And for us, that's like a trackable metric, but that's an organizational process shift that we're so excited about. But it's so cultural, and that's a much harder thing. And so the idea that like people are talking about it and people are doing it is way more exciting to us than like the fact that there's fewer things landing in this shared CSS file.
I love that. So practical.
One of the things I really focus on is accessibility, and for me, it's like, well, accessibility should be pretty easy to track, right? We have WCAG, and it's we can see what defects are created, but actually, it's very, very difficult when you dive into it to use defects and accessibility as a way to track, and depending on who the tester is, when it was tested, where it was tested, it actually gives you so much room for error, and can actually make your design system look bad based on another external factor that you can't possibly identify. And so I've kind of moved away from that. And Jeff put a great quote in the chat from Dan about tell them how you launched the product. But one thing I've been trying to focus on recently is actually let the consuming teams be your trumpet. Like, let them tell the story of how your design systems help them, get things out quicker, or how they helped you reduce the number of accessibility considerations. And that's something that I'm trying to focus on, because people, in accessibility, people do, engineers and designers do think, it takes time and there's more considerations. And it is, it does take more time and considerations to think about a more universally accessible product. And so if people will identify that actually I didn't maybe need to do all the things I used to have to do, hard to track that, but those quotes from teams, I think personally are more powerful, especially to product owners who love to hear that stuff.
I love that, thinking about it that way, right? Because part of it gets to what you said about like potentially making the design system look bad, right? And like there is a risk there of, if we over advocate for what we do and then we're unable to provide follow-up, even if we're doing things really well, it can look like we don't have the follow-up, we don't have the return on investment. So how do we get product to tell our story that we are successful, even if we maybe aren't confidently tracking every single exact number the way we feel is completely accurate? If it comes down to, hey, product, is it working for you? If they're abundantly saying yes, that's like, to me, that's the most important metric you could have.
This has been a fantastic conversation, y'all. You're sharing things that are incredibly practical. There's so many great resources, so many great quotes. It's going to take me a little while to write this wrap up. So that should be the goal of these calls, is to make it really hard to summarize, because there's so much really good material. Elise called it out in the chat. This might be the deepest one we've had so far, for sure. So thank you all for being willing to share what your experiences are, for throwing your comments in here, sharing these resources. Noelle, thank you so much for being here and helping kind of coordinate all of this. It's a lot of work, I know, and it's you get a little dizzy looking from chat to the exam and all of it. So
no, thank you so much.
And that's the end of our session. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. Great discussion.
That's it for this episode. Thanks again to our sponsors, zeroheight and Sparkbox, for making this episode possible. And thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to participate live in future episodes of The Question, visit bencallahan.com/thequestion. And as always, stay in learning mode.